Hey, what's up? I'm Andrew Bacon, and I want to show you how I turned this old pallet into an awesome reclaimed pallet clock. It's actually not as easy as you might think, and I also show you a couple methods that I like to use to tear down a pallet. So check it out on this episode of Field Treasure Designs. So first you want to grab a good pallet. Now be careful to never steal one and only get one with the right permission, or be sure that it is a throwaway. This is called a reciprocating saw blade or sawzall blade, and it's able to cut through wood and metal. It's mainly used for demolition, hence using it to break down a pallet. So then I pop it into my reciprocating saw and I get to work taking down the pallet. I'm using a shorter blade because it doesn't have to go too far, and I'm going to run it down the side to allow it to get in between the board and the side to cut those nails out. Here's a better view of it getting in between. Now this one is a little tricky because there are two boards there. That means there's double the nails to cut through. When there's just a few nails, it's a little bit easier. Another thing to note about this method is it allows you to preserve those nail heads or the nail holes that you can see there that kind of give that pallet, that reclaimed pallet board look. Okay, so I finish up one whole side and then I flip it over and I do the exact same thing on the other side. If you don't want to use the reciprocating saw method, you can use the circular saw method, which I'm going to show you here. So first you lay your pallet on the table or the workbench, and just like you see here, you can run your circular saw across those boards and just cut them off. Now this is a lot easier, however, it doesn't allow you to preserve those nail heads or the nail holes that really give a pallet its kind of cool rustic look. This also makes the board shorter, which you may or may not mind. So there you go, a lot easier and quicker than the other method. Once you're done on one side, you just go to the other side and knock them out. So now there's the challenge of the middle section. So I'm using a longer reciprocating saw blade that you see here, and I'm going to pop it in my reciprocating saw, and I'm going to work my way down the middle spine there so that I can preserve those nail heads and those nail holes. And the reason it's longer is so that I can reach, as you can see there, all the way down in. Okay, cool, I already got one off. Now you can see there's still a nail in there, and I'll show you in just a little bit how to deal with that. For now, the goal is just to get this taken apart. You could also use the circular saw method on each side of the middle if you preferred. So there you go, those are the different methods that I like to use to break down a pallet. I'm gonna go ahead and finish it with the different methods just to show you and complete it, and then we'll move on to the next step. And done. Now to clean up. Ah, it feels so good. Next, I lay out all my pallet boards to see which ones still need attention and which ones are ready to cut. So I have a stack of boards that don't have any nails sticking out, and then I have a stack with boards that still need some nails and other pieces taken off them before they can be cut down. So sometimes there's boards that still have a nail sticking out that's a little too high that needs to be taken out. So here's the tools you need. I've got my hammer, I've got some vice grips or pliers, and then I have a screwdriver with a star bit. It's flat so that it can stick down on that nail and push it through just like you see there. So here's how it works. On this one, the nails are really long and scraggly and sticking out, so it's going to take a little bit more work than just punching a nail back through the board. So I set it up on my risers, and if the nail is straight, I can just hammer it down to be able to pull it from the other side. If the nail is bent, I use my pliers to bend it back to be able to make it straight enough for the hammer to be able to do its job. So after the nails are pushed through enough, you can turn the board over and use your claw on your hammer to pry them all out. Now it's time to rip the boards down to the right width. So right away, we run into a bit of a challenge that's usually common on pallet wood. So right there, the pallet wood nail is in the direct path of the blade. So you want to stop short before you hit the blade with that nail. So then I bring it back to my station where I can punch out that nail just like I did before. So I grab that screwdriver with the star bit, and then I'm able to just punch it through enough to either let it fall or pry it out with the hammer. Now we're good to go ripping down each board, but you want to be careful each time that you don't run into a nail. And if you do, just stop and repeat that process. So by the way, depending on the width and height of your clock, you want to divide that by 4 to get your width. So in my case, I'm going 13 inches tall, which means I want each board to be just about 3¼ inch wide. After I rip down all the boards, it's time to take them to the miter saw to cut them to the right length. Now here's where I kind of look at each board to make sure it's exactly what I want, and I adjust them accordingly, and I line them up so that I'm getting the right side on the right cut. Sometimes the ends of the pallet boards aren't straight, so I cut down the ends at first to make sure that edge is nice and straight. I'm also using a clamp as a stop block so that I use the exact same measurement for each board. After I cut the boards to length, I group them up into groups of 4 and then I sand them all down. I usually start with like an 80 grit sandpaper to knock off any dirt and rough edges, and then I work my way down to 220 grit just to smooth those edges out and make it look nice. The other thing is that this also can reveal some really cool wood grain and texture in the wood during the sanding process. After all the boards are sanded, now is where I decide which boards are going to go on which clock. So I kind of line them up, I work them together. The big thing is to match them with their thickness. Sometimes the boards are thicker than others, so you want to match those up right. But then really it just comes down to preference and how you want that end product to look. So I spend some time matching them all up and getting them into good groups of 4. Once I get all my groups set, I go over to the miter station to cut some white wood out for my back brackets and hanger. I use a drill press to drill my countersink holes, but you could easily use a handheld drill as well. I'm using a countersink drill bit because it has that extra area that the screw head can fit inside, allowing it to be flush. I also have a template board that I'm using at the top there that helps me put the holes in the right places so that I make sure and secure the back bracket to each of the pallet boards. After I drill the holes for the hanger bracket, I need to attach what's called a sawtooth hanger. I buy these on eBay and you can just attach them by hammering them in. And done. Now we're ready for some clock assembly. So I line the boards up against some scrap that I have with a line down the center so I know where the middle is. Once I decide on my area, I flip the boards over so that they're ready to have the back brackets glued and screwed on. I then line my brackets up on the side and grab the middle piece, and then really just like you would think, I glue it and then I screw them down. Now the only thing is to pay attention of, I don't glue the second from the top board, as you can see there. I'm only gluing the other 3 because I'm going to take that other one off in a little bit. I'll show you that in a second. I place them in their right spots and then I screw them down. I'm using 1-inch wood screws to attach them. Now a quick note is I do attach the second from the top board temporarily, and I'll show you why in a second. And done. So now I need to drill the hole for the clock movement stem to fit through. So I grab my tape measure and just make sure I know the middle of the board. Then I set it up on the 2 blocks so I have some room to drill through. I do a pass from the front and then back through the bottom just to clean out that hole and make it nice and smooth. By the way, that's why I secured that one board so that it wouldn't move when I drilled the hole. While this part's done, I went ahead and branded it. Next, I took off that second from the top board so that I could paint the stripe on it. Now, if you're not going to paint the stripe, you could leave the screws in and glue it as well. After painting, I turned my attention to the clock face stencil, which I make by these 1-inch stencils that I bought from Hobby Lobby. You have to buy a bunch of packs to get all the numbers you need, so I first start by cutting out all the numbers. Then I grabbed a piece of poster board and a 5-gallon bucket for something round. You can really use anything round as long as you have a good reference point that's a circle. Then you cut it out. So this is kind of the trick that I use. So I fold it over once, then I fold it again, then I keep folding it so that I can find it kind of a general straight line around that circle. Now these aren't the perfect angles of the clock face, but they give me a reference point so that I can line up those numbers in the right spots. In order to get a more precise location for each number, I start with the vertical line that's from 12 to 6, and then I grab my speed square that I'm using there, it's a larger one, and I find 30 degrees and I pivot it on my surface there to find that exact point. Now if you notice, I lined up that circle perpendicular to that angle so that I can then find that 30-degree mark and then move it all the way down. And then each one you rotate so that it's at 90 degrees, and then you find that 30-degree angle and you work your way around. After I made 12 points at 30 degrees each, I went ahead and drew lines all the way across just to make sure I had all of them accurate. Then I grabbed all my numbers and I placed them at their corresponding points. Then I needed to cut some scrap numbers so that I could tape them in between to keep those secure between each number. And done. My homemade stencil is ready to go. Now that the paint is dry on that one board, I can replace it and then screw it in to attach it to the clock permanently. Then I lay my stencil down and find the right spot, and then I tape it down. To paint the actual numbers, I'm using acrylic white paint. I use a piece of scrap to put a little bit of paint on it so that I can dab it with the stencil brush. You don't want too much paint when you're doing stencils because otherwise it'll bleed underneath. And now the grand reveal. I just gently peel it off and boom, a clock. Now we just need to assemble the clock movement. You can buy these online or at Hobby Lobby. First, you put the rubber washer on so that it's between the movement and the clock itself. Then you push it up through the hole. Then you add the washer. After the washer comes the first nut that you spin on and then tighten real gently. I make sure it's straight, then I use a small wrench to make sure it's tightened just enough. Next, you put on the hands. I'm starting with the hour hand, and then I'm going to put on the minute hand. These are fancy hands that I had laying around and a little bit different than the straight hands I had. Then you top it off with the nut at the end. Then I turn them all to 12 o'clock. That way I can use the dial on the back to set the right time. And we are in business, yes! And there it is, a reclaimed pallet clock. Well, hey, thanks so much for watching. I hope it was helpful, and don't forget to subscribe. See you later.